On September 18th, 2023, Mauler released a short video titled Star Wars Cannot Grow Up. In it, he discusses episode 5 of Ahsoka titled Shadow Warrior. Before doing so, he recalls 2 episodes from 2 other TV shows that he enjoyed that followed a very similar plot concept. A character is stuck in a comatose state and must face an uncomfortable truth about themselves or their situation in order to escape. I highly recommend watching his video first, as this video will assume you have already done so. I will not be giving a blow-by-blow of Mauler's points. If you need to, pause here, go watch his 45-minute video, and then resume from this point. Now, before you get your panties into a twist, I am not disagreeing with Mauler's point in this video. Quite the opposite. I want to expand upon his point. We're going to be using a lot of analogies today, so please bear with me. Let's look at the title of this video. Star Wars Cannot Grow Up. What does this mean exactly? Well, let's say that movies are tasks of varying degrees of complexity. They can vary from things like throwing away trash, to vacuuming the living room, to assembling an IKEA table, to diagnosing and performing a repair on your car. Now, would you task a child with repairing a car? Not if you don't want Child Protective Services knocking on your door. You could ask an adult to throw away the trash, but there's no challenge or complexity to the objective. It's a simple pick up and drop off affair. With diagnosing a car's mechanical issues, it takes either the proper tools or experience to complete this job, and a child has neither of those readily available. And then performing the repair itself is a different issue altogether, with a high probability of trial and error being necessary to figure out how the fit of each part goes. Not to mention the physical and mental work it takes to figure out how to remove parts and put them back with the correct torque specs. But with throwing away trash, you pick it up, walk to the bin, then drop it in. Star Wars is the equivalent of taking trash to the garbage bin, but it gussies itself up in the veneer of something far grander. It pretends to be a deep, complicated, and nuanced story, when the reality is that the depth of the themes and characters on display is shallower than Scrooge McDuck's money pool in today's struggling economy. It takes no troubleshooting, analysis, or critical thinking to pick up and understand what Disney is putting down. Stories like Joker, Cyberpunk 2077, Mass Effect, and even movies for kids like Toy Story 3 task its audience with diving deeper than what is on the surface. Joker tells the story of a man drowning in a crowded room and says, "Yeah, you feel bad for this weird guy, but how many people like him do you acknowledge in the real world?" Cyberpunk 2077 constantly throws you into difficult situations where there is no right answer. There's even a devil sitting on your shoulder the whole game who has his own morals and will criticize or applaud your decisions. But when you take his backstory into consideration, is his applause worth it? The Mass Effect trilogy tells players that they have to learn to live with the consequences of their actions. Characters can die because of direct or indirect actions the player has taken, and those characters will not be coming back in any subsequent games. If you killed Rex, Rex is gone for good in your save file, and his death has great ramifications in the plot. Toy Story 3 has multiple themes that do not patronize the primary demographic of this film, such as the dangers of unquestioning loyalty to an authority, learning to let go of things you've outgrown, allowing a younger generation to experience the things you found to be so great at the expense of never having that thing to yourself again, and even accepting your fate with dignity. Dear God, Pixar, how many people were you trying to kill with this scene? I would go into further detail for each of these examples, but there's a much larger example I want to get into later that will encapsulate everything I'm talking about today. But in reference to Star Wars has no incentive to ask more from its audience when the audience they've courted accepts the thin, substanceless slop that plops out of Disney Lucasfilm's rear nether hole. Slop. Unsatisfying, hollow, homogenized, formulaic, depolarized, uninspired, superfluously flowery, gaudy, and most importantly, disposable. This week's Disney Plus hype train is next month's forgotten meme. Slop is unchallenging and easy to digest. It doesn't approach your favorite characters from a new and polarizing angle. For example, in Mauler's video, he mentions the episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer titled The Weight of the World.
Buffy explains this is the place she fears the most, the cause of everything. This is when Buffy quit, just for a second. She was putting a book back for Giles and it hit her. She can't win. Glory will win and Dawn will die. Buffy didn't just know it, she felt it. She wanted it all to end.
When Dawn dies, I would grieve, but it would be over. I imagined what a relief it would be.
Buffy believes that even having those thoughts led to her failure to protect Dawn, and that means it's over. It will always be over.
It is absolutely a risk to show your character in an unflattering, flawed, and selfish light such as this. Buffy, for a split second, thought it would be a relief if her sister died. The writers were confident that the audience would be able to digest what was being said and see the different factors at play in this moment. But when you're not confident that your audience that has the media literacy of children will be able to assess anything more complex than a McChicken, you have to dumb down and streamline everything. Every person that is a goodman is always a goodman, and every person that is a badman will always be a badman. That's why Disney always has to paint Anakin in some form of antagonistic light, even when it doesn't make sense to the plot. They refuse to acknowledge that Anakin was a hopeful boy turned idealistic Jedi Knight, turned tragic and misguided tyrant, turned redeemed hero. However, Disney cannot remind the audience of anything besides the fact that Anakin is Darth Vader, the evil Jedi gone rogue who slaughtered innocent lives across the galaxy. Even when Anakin is supposed to be helping Ahsoka by teaching her a lesson in this episode, he has to have a studio-mandated fight with her because the audience Disney is relying on to keep the lights on has the attention span of a lemming. But I can't put all the blame on Disney Lucasfilm. The audience that devours this candy-colored slop don't ask to be treated like adults, nor do they demand any higher level of quality. All it takes to keep these hagiographers satisfied and content is the jangling of old keys. Lightsabers, clone troopers, random quotes from 40-year-old movies, mechanical Vader breathing, cartoon characters in live action, decade-old content repackaged in a 2023 HD pack, and overused music. I swear that if I hear the Binary Sunset theme one more time, I might just injure myself. Something breads and circuses. And as Mauler said, if this is your jam, then go for it. Enjoy it. I don't really care if you like it, just don't pretend that it's well thought out art and peak Star Wars when we've had better lightsaber battles in Revenge of the Sith. The most shallow aspect of Star Wars was done better nearly a decade ago. Modern Star Wars is the equivalent of a Chicken McNugget meal. Simple, bland, requires a slathering of sauces to be even remotely edible, and the ingredients are of dubious quality and nature. You can't pick out the spices and herbs in a tempura fried McNugget while you chew. But the fries are okay, I guess. Just don't take too long to eat them. The flat and barren flavor palette of the McNugget dipped in diabetes-inducing sweet and sour sauce is the equivalent of a modern Star Wars show dipped in the sweet, nostalgic sauces of the past, with the somewhat good aspects of the projects aging like the fries in a Happy Meal. But Star Wars isn't the only franchise that, quote-unquote, cannot grow up. I can think of another franchise that not only didn't know how to grow up for a period of time, but also learned how to grow up with its audience. Twice!
I'm hanging on to the other side. I won't give up to the end of
That's right, it's everyone's favorite blue boy. Sonic the Hedgehog has had his undeniable ups and downs, but the blue blur is still here, so he must have done something right. Right? Let's go all the way back to near the turn of the millennia. Sonic was about to make his official jump to 3D. Sonic Team wanted to make their debut with a big old bang. They whipped out Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast. An absolutely girthy game with 6 playable characters and 6 different gameplay styles, each with cutscenes, voice acting, and story themes. The story was a bit darker and more complex than any Sonic media that had come before, dealing with angered gods, the near extinction of a race of people, and the corrupting greed that comes with trying to harness a power that no one was ever meant to control. But that's not really where the series grew up. It was actually the sequel that changed everything. Sonic Adventure 2 was built different. We were introduced to fan favorites Shadow the Hedgehog and Rouge the Bat. Rouge is a character that clues us in on the world building of the universe, as she is a government spy tasked with infiltrating Eggman's operations. But Shadow? Shadow is Sonic Team's most complex character, and he has yet to be topped. I've touched upon most of his backstory already in my Sonic Prime video, so I'll be brief. Shadow is a deeply traumatized character who lost everything and everyone he ever cared about for reasons he still isn't sure of to this day. His best friend was gunned down right before his eyes, and his creator was executed by firing squad while he was in stasis. While Shadow was under the impression that his best friend Maria's final wish was for revenge, in the final hour of the story, Shadow realizes that her true final wish was for Shadow to be a guardian to the people and protect Earth. The execution of this is admittedly clunky, but it is implied that not only Shadow may not be the real Project Shadow, but his own memories may not even be real either. Shadow still has confidence in who he is, even if his mind has been tampered with while he was in stasis. At the end of the story, Shadow sacrifices himself to save the Earth so that he can fulfill Maria's true wish. The credits begin with the characters reflecting on the events of the game, with Eggman pondering the nature of his grandfather's work and questioning his entire worldview. He looked up to his grandfather, only to find out that he had gone mad and secretly plotted to wipe out all of humanity. Seriously, Sonic Adventure 2 Eggman is peak Eggman. Even Sonic has a moment where he seems to wonder about the implications of what Shadow said during their fight with the final hazard.
Sonic, I think I've discovered what the ultimate life form is. It might be you.
Did Shadow know he was going to die? Did he see Sonic not breaking a sweat and realize that Sonic may be more powerful than he is? It's up to the audience how that line is to be interpreted. The surprising depth of this character work is still being discussed to this day. Sonic the Hedgehog grew up. Sonic Team saw that their audience liked the more fleshed out and serious story of Adventure 1, so they doubled down and gave their audience more to chew on. Dare I say, Shadow's story gets even better in the much maligned Sonic 06, but I won't get into that today. But the reception to Sonic 06 scarred Sega and Sonic Team. They stripped back much of what Sonic had become up until that point. The multiple playable characters, the multiple gameplay styles, the more complex story, and the darker, more serious tone, all gone. These changes started with Sonic Unleashed. While Sonic Unleashed had a good exploration of Sonic's personality and an interesting view into how Sonic's self-image is more fragile and tied to his own abilities than one would assume, Sonic Unleashed was a gameplay upgrade but a story downgrade. The cast was significantly trimmed down to just Sonic, Tails, Amy, Dr. Eggman, and Chip, which in and of itself is not a terrible thing, as I stated in my Doki Doki video, but the only characters to get any sort of exploration are Sonic and Chip. Things only got worse with Sonic Colors. Sonic Colors was the first mainline Sonic game in a while to get critical praise from game reviewers. But in order to get that critical praise, Sonic Team and Sega did something they would grow to regret. They sat the fans on the back burner. Sonic Colors had a plot similar in tone and stakes to a Saturday morning cartoon with a slimmed down cast of just Sonic, Tails, and Dr. Eggman. While, again, the gameplay was applauded, the fans rued the day that Sonic Colors got such critical praise, because the plot of Sonic Team's next mainline game's story was a complete joke. Sonic Generation was a celebration of the Blue Blur's 20th anniversary, and this verse was the same as the first. A phenomenal step up in the gameplay department, but a gigantic step down in the story area. This only became more glaring when, after half a decade, Shadow, Rouge, Silver, Blaze, and a bunch of other side characters finally made a reappearance, only to be footnotes in a game that was supposed to be a celebration of the entire franchise. This game also marked the second time Sonic Team learned the wrong lesson from critical praise. Shallow references to older games are good. Green Hill Zone went on to get referenced in nearly every Sonic game after Generations. Ironically, it doesn't appear in Lost World, the only mainline Sonic game I've never finished, so that's pretty funny. So now we've reached the series crossroad that really gave Sonic Team the slap on the back of the neck they needed. Sonic Forces. They gave fans lip service about how they wanted to tell a more serious story with higher stakes like the adventure games, but when the game was released, not only did the fans recoil at it, the critics were sour on it too. Both fans and critics mentioned the shallow story and characters, the lack of commitment to the darker tone, the slimmed down and simplified gameplay, and the tired old references to classic Sonic. As many have stated, classic Sonic did not need to be in this game. But it gets much worse. Sonic Team was getting very sloppy with their writing in this period of time. Sonic Team went on to state that the concept of money does not exist in the Sonic world, which is bullshit when you remember Team Chaotic's story in Sonic Heroes. They also stated that the reason the moon never looks destroyed after the events of Adventure 2 is because it is conveniently turned around to the side that is not destroyed. Right. And then, this unforgettable and nearly unforgivable moment happens with Tails.
Whoa! Chaos! Sonic, help me!
What makes this moment so fucking atrocious was the fact that Tails had dealt with far worse threats than Chaos Zero. In Sonic Adventure 1, Tails stops Eggman by himself, defuses a bomb that was going to nuke Station Square, and defeats Chaos 4, a much stronger version of Chaos. Then in Sonic Adventure 2, he broke Sonic out of a federal prison, tracked down the president, and faced off against Eggman alone again after believing Sonic was dead. The same circumstance as in the first half of Sonic Forces. There is a reason why this moment is considered a never live it down moment on TV tropes. I won't even go into what caused Infinite to become a hyperpowered, edgy villain that works for Eggman. Spoiler alert, it's fucking cringe. With a juvenile understanding of what made the adventure-era games so beloved, it had become clear Sonic the Hedgehog could not grow up. But there is good news. Sonic Team took this criticism to heart. They realized that they were resting on the laurels of Sonic Generations. This was even more embarrassing since Sonic Mania came out the same year as Forces and completely overshadowed it. That game wasn't even made by Sonic Team. It was made by a team of fans. Sonic Team took the L, kept their heads down, and went to work on their next mainline game. And 5 years later, we got Sonic Frontiers, a game that challenged the old formula of holding square/X and occasionally tapping X/A to win. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. But what has been created here is a framework for future games, and it shows a desire to finally grow out of the pre-established formula. The majority of the game is about exploring and combat, while cyberspace levels are more like the typical Sonic levels over the past decade. Some of the cyberspace levels even used layouts from Sonic Adventure 2. I felt so elated when I recognized the level design from Green Forest and Radical Highway. Sure, it still referenced old games, but the sparse references to Genesis era and Dreamcast era games were replaced with meaningful nods to previous events in the timeline, making the characters and world feel like it's connected. Speaking of characters, Sonic Team took a risk by letting the characters be a bit more subdued, introspective, and somber. Sonic is literally risking his life to save his friends from cyberspace while being secretly worried that he might fail. Amy talks about how her scope of sharing her love has been small and mainly centered around the familiar. Knuckles talks about how all he really knows is Angel Island and doesn't know anything outside of what he gets dragged into with Sonic. Eggman created a surrogate daughter because he may be dealing with trauma that might have something to do with the repressed feelings about the relationship between his family and his cousin Maria. And Tails? My God.
Sonic, am I a burden to you?
Wow, and how did you come to this well-thought-out concern?
Whenever there's a crisis, I'm either running away or standing on the sidelines. You're always rescuing me when all I do is follow you around.
Hey, who was it who stopped Eggman from blowing up Station Square, huh? And who broke me out of prison, or saved me from the Deadly Six's trap?
Then I'm wildly inconsistent.
Dude, relax. You've got brains like Eggman, speed like me, and can fly with your butt. It's okay if you still need help sometimes. That's just part of growing up.
When did you get to be so insightful?
I have my moments.
Sonic Team said with their entire chest that they acknowledge the inconsistent writing and that they're sorry, while also having Sonic respond to these concerns in character to clean up the mess of character writing that happened in the 2017 era of Sonic. Sure, it's a little on the nose, but at least they acknowledged it, unlike some other writers. At the end of the story, we get the implication that Tails, Knuckles, and Amy may be getting less focus, allowing them to grow as characters outside of Sonic and setting up the opportunity to give other characters a chance to shine in future games. And that was the second time Sonic grew up with his audience. But Star Wars? Star Wars is stuck in the shallow kiddie pool of the past, afraid to venture out into the riskier, deeper, and darker side of the pool. It refuses to task its audience with any level of critical thinking or investment. It refuses to have any faith that its audience will remember events from previous episodes and movies, let alone previous trilogies or different mediums. Star Wars is so afraid of losing that ever-waning attention span of its audience that it cannot help but create fight scenes out of thin air or jangle keys in a patronizing fashion, referencing old movies for the umpteenth time. However, Star Wars has cultivated this audience. It deserves this audience. They're stuck in a feedback loop, creating content for a fan base that mindlessly applauds for flashing lights and dopamine-triggering sounds, while Lucasfilm is stuck creating content for these people because they are the only people still watching. This audience drops the latest Disney Plus show like a bad habit once it's not shiny and new anymore, forcing Lucasfilm to find some new shiny gimmick to wow them, be it zombie stormtroopers, flashy editing, swords imbued with dark magic, nullifying extended universe characters only to bring them back into canon when it's convenient, or including cameos of celebrities that really shouldn't be within a country mile of Star Wars. This audience and studio relationship is a match made in hell. These two will be stuck like this until one of them eventually taps out. But just like growing up into adulthood, you have to experience strange and uncomfortable things to grow into who you were always meant to be. But because the fear of the unknown and uncomfortable is too great and costly for Lucasfilm,
Star Wars cannot grow up.